Hey truckers, we are going with my adopted daughter is the final boss? Here we go, boys. When playing a game, most people tend to immerse themselves in the protagonist. The cool protagonist and comrades who trust and follow them. An adventure full of energy, searching for a ray of light in the darkness. The ending credits and the feeling of accomplishment after defeating the final boss. However, Yoon Jin-hyuk's immersion was quite different. The beings opposing the protagonists. He sympathized more with those who are commonly called villains. He related more to the crazy clown rather than the Bathuman with a code of non-violence, and to the terrorist boss of Afghanistan rather than the Chable scientist in red iron armor. T/N, Joker, Batman, Raza and Iron Man references. The final bosses and villains had a different impact from the protagonists. They had a different weight and their stories were often more impressive than the heroes when delved into. Jin-hyuk admired such villains, immersing himself in their stories while playing as the protagonist. However, there was one boss that even Jin-hyuk couldn't empathize with. Isn't this character too trashy? Read Adele Heights-Roten. The mastermind behind the 7 disasters of the game's title. Also the fake final boss of the fantasy game, Disaster 7. However, even Jin-hyuk, who loves villains, couldn't help but shake his head at this villain. He was the first ever trashy character that made Jin-hyuk, who loved villains, lose interest for the first time. Even if he's the final boss, isn't this a bit much? Jin-hyuk muttered while watching the rising ending credits. The main villain of Disaster 7 was an absolute evil character. Absolute evil was something that came out in classic games, so it could be easily overlooked. However, Jin-hyuk felt something unsatisfying about the absolute evil he felt from Read Adele Heights-Roten. He created monsters through the deprivation of love and brainwashing, and those monsters made Jin-hyuk feel uncomfortable until the end. He played several times, expecting a different twist in the latter half, but it only ended pathetically, and the question that eventually burst out was, isn't this character too trashy? How did he become the main boss? The only conclusion was that more than 80% of the game company employees were either headless Dullahans, or they had gone mad due to frequent overtime work and projected the CEO onto the final boss. Jin-hyuk's principle was not to play a game again, no matter how much of a masterpiece it was, if the villain was not attractive. Yet, he was playing this game for the 5th time. It was because the other villains were so impressive, except for this pathetic final boss. They're all pitiful. There were too many characters that were heart-wrenching even without looking from the villain's perspective. The 7 disasters created by the tower were particularly so. A female swordsman who joined hands with absolute evil to be recognized by her father. An orc warrior who reached the extreme of despair due to racial discrimination. Reed used their darkness to turn them into monsters. However, if there was one being that was undoubtedly the most pitiful. The real final boss. The ultimate monster created by Read Adele Heights-Roten, codename, Cosmo. In the setting, she was 17 years old and had been turned into a monster after going through various tortures and brainwashing by Reed since the age of 7. She appeared by splitting Reed's head in half, who didn't die until the last moment, and threatened the protagonist and his party. I'll kill you. I'll kill you all. Humans must die. Orcs, elves, dwarves, goblins. Everyone. Everyone. I will destroy all life on the surface. Ha 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 ha. The final boss, who laughed maniacally with an unsettling female voice from the beginning to the end. Jin-hyuk sympathized with the final boss. If he took over Reed's tower and read the records, he could catch a glimpse of the stories about Cosmo. The ultimate monster created by the villain Read Adele Heights-Roten, and the intended failure. He sympathized even more because it was not a failure of her own, but a failure deliberately created by someone else. If I were a villain, I could have made her cooler. A girl who was raised wrong by the wrong person. She had talent, but he envied it, and in the end, both Cosmo and Reed faced a terrible fate. Jin Hyuk didn't like that story. It was inevitable that he would not like such things which left a lingering regret. Sigh, let's just sleep. Jin Hyuk sighed and turned off the computer. It was time to sleep since it was late at night. Tower Master. Tower Master Nim. A whispering voice tickled Jin Hyuk. He tries to ignore it, thinking it's a voice from a dream. Tower Master, it's morning. The voice becomes clearer. Realizing it's not a dream, Jin Hyuk opens his eyes wide. Turning his head, he sees golden snake-like eyes staring at him. Ugh. You. Startled, Jin Hyuk frightens the woman next to him. An unexpected woman was standing in his studio apartment. Who are you? Why yes. I'm Phoebe. No, why are you in my room? Sorry. I apologize for entering your bedroom without permission, Tower Master. The woman kneels and apologizes. Master? Is she calling me Tower Master? What's going on? As Jin Hyuk says this, his view expands. What he sees is not his small studio apartment which had a desk, a bed, and a computer worth 5 months' rent. His room should have clothes worn for 2 days scattered on the floor. But what he sees now is not his room. A room the size of 10 of Jin Hyuk's rooms, with a bed the size of his room and a marble floor. A hotel room? It was a 5-star hotel room he'd never set foot in his entire life. Is this a hidden camera prank? But that seemed far-fetched. Ordinary people with no connections are rarely involved in such situations. Besides, this room layout. I feel like I've seen it somewhere before. Though unrelated to Jin Hyuk, the scenery felt familiar. It wasn't just about the room he was looking at now. And the woman next to me. There were more than 1 or 2 things that bothered him. Her blonde hair and golden snake-like eyes were tolerable. But when a pair of alien-like horns on her head were added, she resembled a very familiar woman in his mind. Despite never having seen her in reality, even her flustered state felt familiar. I'm sorry, Tower Master. I know you're tired these days, but you weren't waking up, and I thought your morning routine would be ruined, so I had to take the liberty of entering your bedroom to wake you up. I committed a grave sin. Please don't kill me. I'm sorry. Her speech was usually slow, but when flustered, she spoke rapidly like a machine gun. Her quirky and timid personality. Her personality and appearance. Could it be? Jin Hyuk uttered the name that came to his mind. Phoebe Asteria Roten, right? Yes. Yes. That's right. I'm Phoebe. Ah, my tongue. She was so excited that she bit her own tongue. Her name was correct, but Jin Hyuk felt chills down his spine. What's wrong with my voice? He thought his voice was just groggy, but even after coughing repeatedly, it didn't return to normal. The fact that Phoebe Asteria Roten calls me master means. A word that crossed Jin Hyuk's mind sent chills down his spine. In a hurry, he gets up and looks into a mirror. No way. It can't be. It's impossible. This is insane. The reflection in the mirror was exactly what Jin Hyuk had thought. The worst villain, Reed Adelheights Roten, was standing there. What the hell? The curse sprang out of his mouth without hesitation. Standing there was not a man in his 20s with unkempt black hair and a scruffy beard, but a young man with long, silver hair that flowed down like a woman's. A slim figure with silver hair, sharp eyes, and golden irises within them. a heavy, solemn voice. And the Tower Master who has a half-dragon as an assistant. Jin-hyuk took all of these facts into account. There's no doubt. Yoon Jin-hyuk had become Reed Adele Heights Roten. Damn it. Jin-hyuk cursed once again. The fact that he had entered the game Disaster 7, which he loved enough to play 5 times, made his heart race. Moreover, he was even more excited about being in the role of the villain he had always admired. However, out of all the villains in Disaster 7, I had to become this piece of trash. The fact that he was Reed Adele Heights Roten infuriated him. Tower Master? As he turned his head, he saw a blonde head peeking out from the door of the bathroom. Reed's loyal assistant, Phoebe, stammered like a frightened puppy. Is something wrong, sir? I don't know what I should do. If I did something wrong, if I did, I apologize. She rambled on and on, looking flustered. Calm down, Yoon Jin-hyuk. Jin-hyuk's actions were completely opposite to those of Reed Adele Heights Roten. So, it must be confusing for Phoebe, who was watching. Jin-hyuk spoke to her as cautiously as possible in his most serious voice. It's nothing. You may leave now. Ah, well, then I'll step out. Her face, which had been peeking out, quickly disappeared, and the sound of the door closing followed. Although she seemed to find it strange, there was no doubt that it had been handled reasonably well. After all, he was an impressive character in a different way. As much as Jin-hyuk disliked the arrogant villain, he knew his information well. An authoritative attitude that didn't fit his position. Most of the time, that would make him look like Reed. In fact, it worked. Phew. Let's calm down for now. It was time to stop looking flustered. Jin-hyuk knew that there was no escaping from his current situation. Those who show weakness are the first to fall. That's the rule for all villains. So, there was only one thing he could do right now. First, learn as much as possible about Reed Adele Heights Roten. He had no choice but to blend in as Reed while observing his surroundings, regardless of how pretentious it may seem. As the place became quiet, Jin-hyuk leaned against the sink and took another look at his face. My current age is much earlier than when encountering the protagonist. At the time the protagonist encountered Reed, he was approaching 45 years and had wrinkles starting to form. Usually, gray hair would make one look old, but because he took care of it well, he appeared like a man in his mid-20s. He hated to admit it, but he was also handsome. Can I see my body condition? If this is really a game, there must be a status window, right? Ding! As soon as he thought about it, a status window appeared in front of Jin-hyuk. Name, Reed Adele Heights Roten. Job, Tower Master of Silence Tower. Age, 35 years old. Disposition, unknown. Health, 1/432/1/432. Stamina, 340/340. Mana, 4/982/4/982. Traits. Tower Master of Silence Tower, Talent Appraisal, Bloodline of Adel Heights, Escalia Second Seat Graduate. Abilities. Magic LV 4, Alchemy LV 3, Crafting LV 3, Magic Science LV 4, Mana Sensitivity LV 4, Elemental Sensitivity LV 4, Spirit Sensitivity LV 4, and 10 others. The abilities were divided by levels, and there was a trait section. What Jin-hyuk saw was definitely the character status window from Disaster 7. The character seems complete, but the specs aren't as good as I thought. A complete character refers to one that has no more room for growth and can only play a significant role in the early and mid stages as a temporary supporting character. Although he was a fake boss, he was still a man with abilities that were almost on par with the final boss. I thought there would be at least one transcendence. The typical level limit for ability is 5, and if certain conditions are met, they can transcend and increase their level to 7. However, even the protagonist can only achieve one transcendence, and it's safe to say that level 5 is the limit for anyone who isn't a major supporting character. Of course, level 4 wasn't a number to be underestimated in a world where the limit was level 5. In addition, Reed's attributes were diverse enough to be considered a master of all magical things, making him a versatile mage. Though, it's different for being a tower master. A level 4 mage could be within the top 20% capable of wiping out a group of monsters, but becoming a tower master requires a minimum of level 5 in magic. If the magic level isn't 5, one must gain an advantage in other aspects, but mana sensitivity, which affects total mana and recovery rate, was also 4, as were the necessary elemental sensitivity for elemental magic and spirit sensitivity, the foundation of spirit magic. Well, if you think of him as the Tower Master of Silence Tower, it's not that surprising. Reed Adele Heights Roten's residence was the Red Curtain Tower. T/N, Red Curtain is the literal translation of, I can't find any better word for it. Later on, I might change it if I find a better word. Can suggest in comments. However, many mages sarcastically called it the Tower of Silence because nobody visited it. Seeing the specs of Reed, the tower's owner, it was easy to understand why he was made fun of. Jin-hyuk focused on more relevant information that could serve as a clue. It was his age. 10 years before his death at the hands of the protagonist. This meant that it was before the game Disaster 7 even started. The story of Disaster 7 spans 3 years until the ending, so it is now 7 years before the game starts. 10 years. Jin-hyuk unconsciously muttered the words. Let's say he entered the world of the Disaster 7 game. But why did he come as Reed from 10 years ago? Ordinary mages wear robes. It's a simple rule of the fantasy world, but there was a reason explained in Disaster 7. Swordsmen's weapons are swords, and archers' weapons are bows and arrows. The ultimate weapon of a mage lies in their secrets. They couldn't reveal what magic they knew, how they fought, or what their secret measures were, even to party members who had their backs. Secondly, they wore robes to protect the magical tools and books they carried, as their performance could be affected by the weather. For these reasons, tower masters have different attire from ordinary mages. If mages value secrets, tower masters value the reputation of their towers. So, instead of wearing robes that conceal themselves, they wear noble-like uniforms. In Reed's case, it was a red uniform with gold trim and the mark of the Silence Tower Master. Since it wasn't much different from a modern suit, there was no difficulty in wearing it. Knock, knock. While checking his appearance in the mirror and finishing up, he heard a knock on the door. Jin-hyuk cleared his throat and did his best to act like Reed. Come in. Phoebe cautiously opened the door and entered. Master, are you ready? Her nervous voice outside sounded like a frightened puppy. Now that I think of her as a dog, she really looks like one. She gave off the vibe of a golden retriever with a puppy face and a larger build. Her cheeks looked like they would stretch like sticky rice cake if you grabbed them. Since Reed was a conservative and authoritative figure, it would be crucial to maintain a natural demeanor. Yes. Huh? The puppy widened her eyes and sent a signal as if something had gone wrong. Did I act poorly? What went wrong? As soon as he thought that, Phoebe clicked her teeth and asked. Don't you want to ask me about the inventory of the library or mana vessel management methods? He almost reflexively asked, what's that? Despite having played the game 5 times, these were such useless pieces of information that his mind was filled with question marks. Anyway, at this point, his attempt to act like Reed had partially failed, and he needed to recover. I don't have time to check those things every day. But you always say we shouldn't forget these things and always make me recite them for 30 minutes. Do you want to keep arguing? Not wanting to continue this awkward conversation, he snapped at her with an irritated tone. Whether that was the right answer or not, Phoebe's flustered voice became resolute. No, no. If the Tower Master says so, that's how it is. The Tower Master's words are the truth. If he asks, she must answer, and if she doesn't have it, she must create or bring it. His authoritative demeanor came in handy at times like this. Still feeling uneasy about ending the conversation this way, Reed added a remark. I'll occasionally ask, so always be prepared. Yes, sir. Phoebe responded with an energetic voice. Well, good. With this, he roughly grasped the tone and feeling of their conversation. Let's go to the office. Reed naturally led her to guide him, and Phoebe guided him to his office. Reed's location was the Tower of Silence. Also called the Magic Tower of Silence, it was a group of mages who gathered to study magic and broaden their knowledge. Reed was the master of the place, and people called him the Tower Master of Silence. The Tower of Silence had a total of 82 floors. At the beginning of the game, the Magic Tower was operated on a small scale with 120 apprentice mages, 50 junior mages, 30 senior mages, and 5 chief mages. It's exactly like the game, no, it's even more detailed than the game. When he experienced it through the game, there were limitations to the level of detail that computer graphics could provide. Seeing it with the graphics of reality, it was an even more magnificent and serene place. The place they reached by riding the elevator powered by magic stones was the top floor of the tall tower. It was the Tower Master's office. The white marble floor was decorated with red stone walls, and on those walls hung relics and treasures. The office desk made of old wood had panels that could be operated like a smart screen. There were all the panels needed for tower management, such as storage magic, summoning magic, and mana control management magic. Reed didn't hastily touch those panels, instead, he turned his body to look out the window. A vast blue sky and mountains with clouds hanging below. The blue forest and plains spread out beneath them, and small villages as well. It was a scene that perfectly captured the fantasy world of Disaster 7. No, not perfectly. When the disasters start to appear, everything becomes desolate, barren wasteland filled only with screams. This kind of scenery was only present at the very beginning. 10 years ago, it looked like this. Jinhyuk possessed Reed's body. That too, 10 years ago. 10 years ago. There was no doubt that 10 years had some meaning. It was just frustrating that it seemed to be locked away deep in the depth of his memories, unable to be recalled. Master, are you there? He turned his head at Phoebe's voice, which sounded like a high-pitched, elongated rice cake. She was peeking in here just as she had been when he was in the bathroom. What is it? I came to deliver this. Phoebe approached him with a bright expression and quick steps. In her hand, she held a carefully bound paper, like a precious treasure. The moment he received it, Reed's expression twisted horribly. Project, Flower Garden. The moment he heard that name, Reed felt a surge of anger as he reflexively clenched his fists. Using the materials you provided, I've organized the presentation materials for this upcoming meeting once more, hee. I thought it would be good to have multiple perspectives, so please just use my organized materials as a reference, and if you could, give me your opinion, once. She was expecting to hear a compliment from him, but her smile gradually faded as she looked at Lee's expression. She undoubtedly thought that he didn't like her arbitrary actions. Master, is it not to your liking? Should I do it again? Huh? No, just go. Yes. Phoebe walked out of the office with a frightened expression. Reed didn't pay attention to her state. For a moment, he was so flustered that he almost forgot that he had to act like Reed. All because of Project Flower Garden. I think I know why I came back 10 years ago. Did the gods grant his secret wish? At first, he thought that possessing the body of a thoughtless villain was a way to torture him. However, recalling the existence of Project Flower, Reed's thoughts changed. The starting point of all stories. The reason why Reed was the villain. The reason why the protagonist had no choice but to go on adventures. In other words, it was a project that was nothing less than the purpose of the Disaster 7 game. Handling mana is an innate talent. Among humans, 80% live their entire lives without any connection to mana. Even among the remaining 20%, the majority struggle to awaken their abilities. While some learn how to manipulate mana before they even eat solid food, others only manage to feel mana just before they die. That's why even a renowned professor once said, "Magic begins and ends with learning." With the belief that there is no limit, many magicians tirelessly learn and pass their knowledge on to the next generation, continuously advancing the field. However, Reed disliked such thinking. He loved the present world more than the afterlife and was a man who believed in his ability to excel in anything, driven by ambition. But he lacked the most important talent, mana capacity. What clearly defined his limits was his amount of mana. Despite trying all sorts of methods, he could not reach the level of mana possessed by geniuses. That's why all his magic remained at level 4, not reaching the maximum level of 5. In the end, he was nothing more than a criminal striving towards genius. Reed, who had hit his limits, was driven to the edge of a cliff and despaired. As the desperation and despair strangled him, a chance for rebirth flashed through his mind. Like drawing water from a high mountain lake, he could link with a person, making them his mana tank. That was the Flower Garden Project, which left disasters for humans. While everyone has probably thought about this concept once, no one had established it until Red completed Project Flower Garden and established the concept completely. The longing for genius had given him one last chance. The project that would bring disaster to humans was finally completed. And ultimately, the reason he dies. As Reed, not Jinhyuk, the critical project that determined his fate was underway. Considering the timing, all the formulas for the project must have already been created, with only the implementation left. The first success turns Reed into a complete monster. Project's first subject and the final boss, codename Cosmo. Its completion accelerated the creation of other disasters. Thus, the 7 disasters were created, the main bosses of the original game, Disaster 7. How will they carry out this project? Reed stared intently at the notes Phoebe had organized. He didn't even want to touch them, let alone open them. He thought that looking at these notes would be like crossing an irreversible river, just as Adam and Eve touched the forbidden fruit. The moment the notes touched his fingers. Master. Phoebe's sticky rice cake-like voice rang out again. Reed raised his head and looked at Phoebe. What is it? Well, a visitor came. A visitor? Yes, he said he brought the items needed for this project. Reed had a rough idea of what those items might be. If they were items for this project, they would undoubtedly be children. Young boys and girls with unawakened potential would be used like lab rats. Original Reed would have definitely objected, but the Reed with Jinhyuk's spirit inside was different. I don't care. His words stopped as he was about to send them away. He almost made a huge mistake. Reed successfully modifies the first subject of the project. This meant that he could meet the final boss, codename Cosmo, in this event. Should I send them away? Phoebe, reading his hesitant expression, asked. No. Reed shook his head. Tell them to come in. After instructing them to enter, 10 minutes later, Reed rode the magic stone-powered elevator to the 32nd floor. There was a reception room on the 32nd floor of the Silence Tower. Upon entering the open reception room, there was a man who seemed far from a magician standing there. No, it was an impression that made one wonder if he was human at all. Oh my, hello, Tower Master, he he he. A sharp voice that instinctively made one's eyes narrow. It was a typical line and pose that seemed to say, I'm terribly sneaky. Reed knew this man well. The one-eyed rat, Leto. His protruding front teeth and crooked posture made him feel like a standing rat. Moreover, he had lost one eye and wore a black eye patch, earning him the nickname of One-Eyed Rat. Leto. I see. He, you can call me the One-Eyed Rat if you want. Whether it's one-eyed or a rat, call me as you please. High-ranking people don't call me by the name Leto anyway. That was true. Seeing how the surrounding NPCs treated Leto, he was no more than a rat, so that must be what he was used to. What would a villain say here? After briefly thinking, Reed replied. Don't order me around, Leto. Ouch, what order? I'm just a lowly rat. When Reed displayed a physiological aversion, Leto seemed frightened and hesitated. If one didn't know him, they might think he was a human with rich emotional expressions, but Reed knew how calculating Leto was. He lived in the underground of the imperial capital, Hamel, and mainly ruled the underground as a king through information and errands. Human trafficking, gambling, smuggling, and so on. Committing heinous acts that couldn't be done under the light and prolonging his life was his daily routine. He was a bystander in terms of position. He only moved for money, so he was a man who would sell information to enemies if he was paid. Whether he was a good guy or a bad guy didn't matter. He's a reliable source of information, and the content itself is trustworthy. He was the kind of person to keep close but never get involved with. Reed moved on to the main point. So, have you brought the items you prepared? Of course. These are items that you would like, sir. Leto, who had been laughing maliciously and speaking in a high-pitched tone, shouted in a heavy voice from outside the door. Come in quickly, you pigs! The moment Reed saw the items, he was at a loss for words. No, he had already anticipated it, but it was a sight that made one hesitate to look at it through civilized eyes. Children strung together by iron chains like Vienna sausages. All of them looked haggard, and there was no life in their eyes. A total of 30 children entered the reception room. The number of children was quite large for a covert human trafficking operation. Oh dear, I apologize, Tower Master. The smell must be quite strong, right? It doesn't matter. Leto seemed to think that the expression was due to the stench emanating from the boys and girls. It was just that Reed was not used to seeing such a scene while being a civilized person. Leto rubbed his palms together and spoke to Reed. How is it? These children can be dealt with without any trouble, as you ordered, he. How can there be no trouble? These kids are all troublemakers caught from the kingdom and the empire. They are taken care of for maintaining public order and security. They were like trash. There would be many of them even if an orphanage was run. In the end, Reed, who uses such orphans, is also trash. There was no room for excuses. Since Reed had allowed Leto to set foot in the tower, he decided to do his job. The Flower Garden project targets only those with talent. Those without even a hint of potential or those with ambiguous abilities could not survive in the project structure. The success of such a daring project was thanks to Reed's ability to see talent. Talent appraisal. Type active. You can check the potential of the other person. You can see the unawakened traits and the level that can be raised. You cannot check your own potential. I know how much the other person will grow, and I can watch it happen. It could be said that this cursed trait accelerated Reed's inferiority complex. However, it is because of this ability that he could carry out the daring project called Flower Garden. It was what made it possible to create the 7 disasters and codename Cosmo. If it weren't for his twisted personality, it would have been a talent that could make him a sufficiently shining villain. Reed used that skill to scan the children. As the talent appraisal ability activated, he could see auras emanating from behind the children. Focusing on one of them, a status window appeared as if floating in front of Reed. Name, unknown. Occupation, orphan. Age, unknown. Disposition, chaotic neutral. Traits. Quick hands. Abilities. Assimilation LV1, Stealth LV2, Pyrotechnics LV1. Unawakened traits and abilities. None. When Reed looked at a child with no visible aura, there was no unawakened potential. They were literally F-grade talents. He examined a few of the more prominent individuals among them, but they possessed traits and abilities unrelated to magic, such as Merchant's Wealth or Sword Demon. They were far from the kind of talent Reed was looking for. The most amusing thing was that among the boys and girls gathered here, there was no one with more potential than the one-eyed rat, Leto. Reed felt something strange about it. Surely, the first target of Flower Garden should have been Cosmo, the final boss of Disaster 7 and the monster created by Reed's twisted affection. With the completion of that monster, the Flower Garden project gained momentum and other disasters were created. As Reed leaned against the backrest and stroked his chin, Leto checked him out like a ghost. Having survived by eating crumbs, he had the intuition that he wouldn't even be able to pick the bones if things continued like this. Oh my lord, there are still more talented individuals available. Would you like to continue to see them? Let's do that. As Leto gave a hint, his subordinates moved the slave boy standing at the front. Shortly after, another 30 people appeared. However, they were no different. Useless abilities with useless origins. Next. By the 3rd round, Reed quickly scanned them for potential and immediately called for the next group. By the 5th round, he had seen a total of 150 slave boys and girls. Nothing. Reed couldn't find codename Cosmo. Not to mention, he couldn't even find children with abilities close to it. Well, if they were noticeable talents, someone would have adopted them already. He could understand that. However, he couldn't show that understanding to Leto. Now was the time to get angry. You rat. Yes? Reed leaned his chin on his fist, resting his hand on his armrest. Is that all you're good for? What do you mean? I'm asking if you're taking me lightly like the others. Upon asking, Leto's eyes widened. Underestimating a magician means courting death. Leto sensed death in his words. As Reed frowned, Leto stopped laughing deviously like a rat. Being quick-witted, he should know how annoyed Reed was. Leto bowed his head in shame, sweating profusely. No, why would I dare to underestimate you, sir? Show your trash collection to others. I am the Tower Master of Silence, Reed Adelheids Roten. I'm sorry. It's my fault. Leto knelt down and sincerely apologized. Is this enough? Reed showed a bit of his dignity as a Tower Master. Now, he could grant mercy and send him back. But it's still strange. 150 people. The fact that Leto had precisely brought 150 people to show him weighed on Reed's mind. Normally, it would be impossible to bring exactly that number of people. That's why Reed asked Leto a question with the thought that this was the last one. Are there any more? More, well, there is, but... What is it? Leto fiddled with his fingers, sweating profusely, and said, Well, I don't think it's what you're looking for, Tower Master. So I set it aside separately. You set it aside? How many are you talking about? Leto showed one finger. Well, just one person. One person. At those words, Reed crossed his legs and said, Bring her here. But she's really not worth much. I'll be the judge of that. Don't make me say it again. Leto no longer argued and signaled to his subordinate. Out of 150 people, would he really be interested in one particular girl? That seemed unlikely. Leto was not a man to work carelessly, and he had an eye for merchandise. There's always someone better than the best. However, he only knew the surface value of the merchandise. While Leto was simply looking at the box, Reed could see through the contents of the box. And his intuition turned out to be right. Here she is. A girl with lush white hair and a seemingly dazed expression. She looked so innocent and naive, as if she didn't even know how she was being treated. She's a 7-year-old immature child who can't even speak properly. Leto introduced her with a face that seemed to hold no expectations. However, Reed's eyes lit up in contrast to Leto's expression. As they say, knowledge is power. I didn't expect her aura to fill the entire room. Through the talent appraisal, he can see how different her innocent and naive face was from her aura that was running wild. It was a formidable potential that seemed to swallow the entire room. Reed stared at her quietly and looked at her specs. Name, unknown. Occupation, orphan. Age, 7 years old. Alignment, chaotic neutral. Health, 50/50ths. Stamina, 50/50. Mana, 40/40ths. Traits. None. Abilities. Digestion LV1, Purity LV5. Unreleased traits and abilities. Ruler of Magic, Master of Adaptation, Eternal Whole. Magic LV7, Magicology LV7, Mana Sensitivity LV7, Elemental Sensitivity LV7, Mental Power LV6, and 5 more. A monster that was completed at the age of 17, starting at the age of 7. There was no doubt. This child is codename Cosmo. Reed struggled to maintain his composure. He bit his finger in surprise when he saw the impressive specs hiding behind the innocent face. I expected it, but these abilities are truly outrageous. Ruler of Magic, a trait considered the best in magic. Master of Adaptation, which allows her to absorb all education twice as fast. Eternal Whole, which, once awakened, surpasses the mana capacity of a blue dragon that stands at the pinnacle of magic. She possessed EX-grade abilities so exceptional that even a protagonist with a magic build would have to struggle to barely match them. On top of that, almost all magic-related attributes are in a state that can be transcended. In the latter part of the story, she was a wild card that troubled both the protagonist and the world. It was a wonder that no magician had taken in such a monstrous child until now. Of course, at first glance, she must look like a dullard. She had low health, low stamina, and even lower mana. She was a girl as frail as a flatfish that would die if struck just once. At first glance, she didn't seem like a talent worthy of nurturing as a magician. What do you think? Shall I call in some other children instead? How much? Excuse me, you mean you're thinking of buying this child? Leto looked at Reed with an expression of surprise. Reed silently stared at him without answering the question. Leto recalled his warning not to make him repeat himself. Well, 500 up. Leto had originally intended to ask for 100 up. But seeing Reed's attitude, he blurted out the price of 500 up, the same as the other slaves. I'll take her. Really? Asked Leto in disbelief. Reed responded calmly, You're the one who said 500 up. She must be worth that much, right? Yes, yes. Of course. A merchant without credibility can't make a living. Thank you. Leto rubbed his palms together and grinned slyly. His left eye seemed to display the words smells money, while his right eye appeared to read. Got it as he showed a delighted expression on his face. Reed knew that he had been overcharged. He didn't like Leto's triumphant expression, but he had to lay this groundwork. I need to use Leto as an informant, so I'll just have a cool deal with him. For Tower Master Reed, 500 up wasn't a significant amount. From Leto's perspective, they would both profit through future transactions. Reed called Phoebe and paid the 500 up. Upon receiving the 5 silver coins, Leto respectfully bid farewell. Then, have a good time, kihihi. Leto left with an unpleasant laugh until the end. Reed looked at the outside scenery. He saw the carriage carrying the slaves Leto had brought along disappearing into the distance. There's nothing I can do for those children anyway. Although it weighed on his mind, offering pity wouldn't be good for either party. If he couldn't take responsibility, they would eventually be caught by slave hunters again or fall into the hands of someone even more vicious than Leto. Reed turned his head and looked at the girl on the sofa. Her disheveled white hair in shabby clothes, and her face with clearly visible tear stains under her eyes. The only thing shining was her red eyes filled with purity. Red eyes were said to be cursed and considered a mark of misfortune. But could one say that looking at these ruby-like eyes? He had his doubts. Reed couldn't help but feel a warmth spreading through his heart at the sight of the girl's smile. It was as if a small ray of hope had broken through the clouds of despair that had surrounded him for so long. He returned her smile with one of his own, a genuine expression of affection and determination. From this moment on, he vowed to protect her, to nurture her potential, and to ensure that she would never have to endure the same fate he had planned for her in his previous life. As he gazed into her innocent eyes, Reed felt a sense of purpose wash over him. No longer would he be driven by jealousy or despair. Instead, he would strive to become the father this girl deserved, to guide her towards a future filled with happiness and fulfillment. And so, with their hands intertwined, Reed and the girl embarked on a new journey together, one filled with endless possibilities and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. After adopting codename Cosmo, Reed had a clear path he needed to follow. Changing the life of fake boss, Reed. From the lame villain Reed with no sense of style to a Reed who can at least leave an impression on someone. Reed decided to make a note of what he needed to do to achieve this. 1. The project, Flower Garden, will be scrapped. Since codename Cosmo, the first target of the project, has been taken in as a daughter instead of an experimental subject, it's impossible to follow the same path. And it's physiologically impossible, too. Provoking someone's hatred and turning them into a monster was not his style. 2. Fulfill my role as Tower Master. Reed had never been fully committed to his role as the master of the Silent Tower. He always harbored ambitions to leave the tower and swallow the Cloud Continent, the continent of Disaster 7. Because of that ambition, he ended up turning everyone against him, and ultimately, Reed faced his death. What is the role of a Tower Master? The tower advances magic, and the height of the tower showcases the status and honor of the magicians, making it their pride. Of course, it doesn't end there. protecting small villages that are not influenced by the kingdom, monitoring the monsters and any abnormalities in mana that inhabit the area, and analyzing those abnormalities to contribute to peace and well-being were also their responsibilities. Those who took on such a mission were the magicians of the tower. And as always, busy with fantasy plots. As is always the case with fantasy settings, it begins with the crumbling of that status and honor. Breaking, and breaking again. As if it's destined to collapse like Jenga, with each piece being pulled out and barely holding together. T/N, Jenga, for more info. The Tower of Silence was also destined to fall like other magic towers. However, it bothered him that it would be done by the hand of a protagonist, not an enemy. I have to protect the tower. It was such a reflexive judgment that it seemed like remnants of his past conscience remained. Next, he wrote down his last task. Reed's most shining trait was undoubtedly his talent appraisal. Given the state of the world a decade ago, there must be many talented individuals who can't even recognize their own talents and are wandering aimlessly. The roadmap ahead can be divided into 2 parts. 3-1, focus on educating Codename, Cosmo, who has been taken in as a daughter. 3-2, gather other potential disasters besides Cosmo. The more, the merrier. Reed, tapping his memo pad with a pen, pondered and finally reached a conclusion. Number 1 seems to be the way to go. First, focus on one thing wholeheartedly. If he couldn't properly raise the most outstanding talent, Codename, Cosmo, he would already be disqualified. Because I promised to be her father. Nurturing her abilities not as a researcher and experimental subject, but as a father and daughter. For him, who was a novice in every aspect, as a father or a caregiver, the situation with just the girl was already overwhelming. At first, it was best to suppress his greed and do what he could. With that thought, an idea flashed through Reed's mind. He wrote down an additional point, realizing it was far more essential than the previous 2 he had recorded. Reed will undoubtedly have many enemies. It's impossible to say he has no enemies with that personality. Besides, all the characters I have in mind now are villains. Most of the talents Reed would recruit in the future would inevitably be people destined to be villains. Such talents harbor emotions which are like ticking time bombs, and they often don't act rationally. Codename, Cosmo will eventually become a magician who surpasses him, and if he doesn't prepare enough countermeasures for that, he would become a person who aims for a position that doesn't match his worth. But Reed faced another problem. He's already a completed character. He had accessed all fields of magic and had hit the limit, which is why he tried to obtain greater power through the extreme measure of Project Flower Garden. First of all, being versatile gives a wide range of choices. Reed Adelheitz Roten was a versatile character capable of using all magic, except for the high-powered spells that could turn an area into ashes. Is this the ability I should choose after all? The ability Reed was looking at was something that should have been sealed deep within his mind. Magic Engineering LV-4. It was a technique that combined magic stones and magical incantations with machines to draw out power. For example, the magic tower elevators and the screen magic on office desks were all realized through magic engineering. However, Reed didn't have a high opinion of this ability, to the point of sealing it away. The main reason was that the advancement of magic engineering was believed to be detrimental to pure magic. In the end, during the Disaster 7 story, everyone acknowledged magic engineering and relied on its power to overcome disasters. It was an excellent technology for supplementing inadequate abilities. Magic engineering was perfect for making the most of Reed's ambiguously mediocre abilities. Reed must have known this fact and practiced it since his apprenticeship. However, ultimately, what he desired the most was pure magic. He thought that using shortcuts meant admitting the limitations of magic, and as a tower master, he completely abandoned magic engineering. But even other magicians who love purity have come to recognize the necessity of magic engineering. In a world where such a future is guaranteed, is it necessary to insist on this? If I delve into magic engineering, I can raise other magic skills to level 5. With just a little more ability, even reaching level 6, called Transcendence, was possible. This was a fact known only to Reed, who had experienced Disaster 7. Tower Master. As soon as he decided on the path he needed to take, Phoebe's voice came from outside the door. However, her voice was not as relaxed as usual, but rather urgent. When he glanced up, he could see traces of dampness that had just dried from Phoebe's hair. "I've bathed the young lady as instructed." She entered with a cheerful smile, accompanied by the girl. The girl, who had been quite impressive with her pitiful appearance, was now radiating light. Her slender and lustrous white hair, as if freshly spun silk, and moist ruby stone eyes. Wearing a light white dress, she looked almost like a doll. "Where did you get the clothes?" "I have so many dolls, hee hee. It just happened to fit the young lady perfectly." It wasn't just a coincidence that she felt like a doll. "Well done. Since she'll be living in this tower from now on, I'll ask you to find more clothes." "Yes, yes. Leave it to me. Now, let's go out." Phoebe grinned happily at the praise. She carefully stepped back, leaving Reed and the girl alone in the room. I just realized I don't know your name. Do you know your own name?" She cautiously looked up at Reed. And then lowered her head again, fiddling with her fingers. It seemed she was claiming not to know who she was. As her code name was Cosmo, the name Cosmo could have been familiar. But that was the name of the insane woman who was the final boss. No, it wasn't even a name. A code name is just that, a code name. It's nothing more than a simple string of characters with no room for affection. So, what would be a good name for her? I've actually thought about it before. While thinking about the final boss of Disaster 7, he had wondered what he would have called codename Cosmo if he had raised her. And now he tried calling her that name. "From now on, your name is Rosaria." With that declaration, her eyes grew even larger. As if she liked the name, a message appeared in front of Reed. "The name has been changed. Unknown. Rosaria Adele Heights Roten. The occupation has been changed. Orphan daughter of the Silence Tower Master." Along with the message of the change, her occupation also changed. Now, she had become Reed's daughter in every sense. But, would a child who doesn't even know her own name understand this? Since she didn't speak, he couldn't tell yet. While he was pondering, Rosaria turned her gaze elsewhere and examined Reed's study. "Rosaria." She turned her head back to look at Reed. It became clear that she knew it was her name. "Yes, your name is Rosaria." Reed stroked her head. Rosaria smiled quietly. The magical factions on the Cloud Continent were divided into two main categories. There are the so-called official mages, who belong to an empire or kingdom. And there are the tower mages, who draw mana from ley lines for magical research and local security. Both hold a belief in the peace and development of magic, but their goals and development are significantly different. If the official magicians prioritize white magic, which focuses on healing and defensive magic from the belief that they should benefit humans, tower magicians tend to prioritize black magic, which places more emphasis on curses and offensive magic. That's why the towers were portrayed quite negatively in Disaster 7. There are a total of 13 magic towers on the Cloud Continent. Every month, they hold a Tower Master Conference to share information that can be used to counter the workshop magicians and strengthen their unity. The stronger the conflict between the officials and the Tower, the more necessary it is to confirm their bonds through the Tower Master Conference. Thus, at times like these, absence itself was almost taboo. The conference venue was decorated with antique furniture. 13 chairs surrounded a large round table with a map of the Cloud Continent engraved on it. However, only 12 of the 13 Tower Masters were seated. The empty seat had the name Reed Adelheids Roten engraved on it. Is Roten absent today? A large man glanced at the empty seat and muttered. Then, everyone started adding their comments as if they had been waiting. It's surprising that the person who should be the protagonist of this conference isn't here. Wasn't the project named Flower Garden? I heard a lot of rumors, and the master of Jade Tower said it was a very satisfying idea. T/N, for now I will use the temporary names of towers. I might change it in future. Oh, my. What are you talking about? Wasn't the master of Greenwood Tower the one who jumped the gun? Although they gathered under the pretext of friendship and information exchange, the fierce rivalry was inevitable. The large man intervened to stop the emerging fight. Are you still thinking about having childish arguments at this age? My apologies. Anyway, does anyone know the reason for the Tower Master of Silence's absence? Everyone fell silent at the large man's words. Reed Adelheids Roten was the Tower Master of Silence. The Tower of Silence was the weakest among all the towers. Reed was in a position where he had to reach out and expand his network first, but that was not his character. He was a twisted person who didn't know when to bend or what to say when he needed to. So, there wouldn't be anyone who could communicate with such a Tower Master, let alone know the exact situation. That's what everyone thought. I heard the project was overturned. All eyes focused on the person who uttered those words. There sat a woman with the physique of a girl in her early teens. Black hair, a nonchalant expression that seemed annoyed by everything, and a bold appearance. Wearing a revealing dress instead of the neat uniform like the other Tower Masters, and rudely putting her feet on the round table, yet no one was scolding her. Tower Master of the Black Sky, Phrygia Vulcan Darkrider. It seems the Black Sky Tower Master knows something. I didn't really want to know, but a fledgling working at the Tower of Silence told me. The project was scrapped? Yes, a young mage working at the Tower of Silence said that, for some reason, the project, which had established all theories, was suddenly discarded. Discarding it means, the project must have been worthless. Or it could be a lie. A project related to magical research means that there is considerable information and money in the tower. Therefore, it is no different from showing the status of the Tower Master themselves. That's why all the Tower Masters always have one or two projects, whether long-term or short-term, and whether they fail or succeed, they tend to reach a conclusion one way or another. It was always the case, but the Tower of Silence was a different story. It had fewer floors than the other towers, fewer personnel, and the only thing it had was money, the lowest-ranked Tower Master. Would such a Tower Master concoct false stories to try to make a leap in recovery with the project, Flower Garden, to raise reputation? If it was a lie? Then, as much as they had hoped, resentment would arise, and he would end up plummeting even further. It seems Roten has finally hit rock bottom. A statement everyone had in mind, but couldn't dare to say out loud. At that moment, they all silently agreed. Do you think Reed Roten is that kind of person? With that thick skin? Someone objected. The blue-haired Tower Master stood up and countered. Her tall stature, elegant uniform, and weighty gestures suited her well. Her sharp gaze hid a pair of shining blue eyes. It was Dolores Jade, the Tower Master of the Wallen. He's not that kind of person. He is a person who embodies the word evil. Cunning, wicked, and malicious. Escalia's childhood best friend steps up to defend him. Phrygia began to snicker and mock. Dolores glared at Phrygia, who was sitting across from her. I've told you to stop using that nickname, Black Sky Tower Master. Other than being classmates, we have nothing in common. Yeah, sorry. Is that better? Although the blue-haired Tower Master glared menacingly, Phrygia didn't budge. She flicked her ears and offered a half-hearted apology. So, does the Wallen Tower Master have a different idea in mind? I think he discovered a dangerous magic that made him give up presenting the flower garden, which he had promoted with his reputation at stake. That's what I believe. It couldn't be more of a reckless thought. However, Reed was the kind of person one would not be at all surprised if reckless thoughts never crossed his mind. Well, if the Tower Master of Silence overturned the flower garden based on his personality, it can only mean something more important has come up. Does the Black Sky Tower Master know anything else? I'm not carrying a universal information pouch on my belly. How am I supposed to know that? It was because even a magician working at the Tower of Silence wouldn't have the skills to access the exact contents of Project Flower Garden, so they couldn't know the exact situation. And so everyone fell silent. They didn't speculate any further. They all focused on what Dolores had said. What if she was right and dangerous magic had been discovered? It makes me even more curious. Even though it seems like it would definitely lack substance. Instead of the resentment and betrayal they felt from the Project Flower Garden, they became even more curious about the information the Tower Master of Silence had hidden. Meanwhile, at the same time as the Tower Master's discussion, at the Tower of Silence, what Reed was doing was neither honing his skills nor researching forbidden dark magic. Do you know what this word is? Wind. How about this? Apple. He was personally teaching Rosaria the language. The fact that Reed had taken her in as his foster daughter was still not widely known within the tower. There wasn't much main work for him to do, and even when the project was underway, Phoebe had taken care of most of the operations, so Reed had nothing to do. That's why Reed taught Rosaria language in the Tower Master's library. She absorbed and answered all the words Reed had taught her so far. Except for just one. All right, last question. Who am I? Papa. I mean my name. Papa. For some reason, only when referring to Reed himself, she didn't give the correct answer. It was hard to say anything about her pronunciation, typical of a child, and her innocent response. How could he scold her with a smile on her face? Yeah, I'm Papa, Papa. He. Rosaria laughed heartily. She began to read a book with her pure ruby eyes. The book she was reading was an encyclopedia with records of all things in the Cloud Continent. There were no fairy tales or heroic epics in the Magic Tower, which was dedicated to magic research. Among them, the only book with the most pictures and text was that encyclopedia. I can't believe she learned to speak and read in just a week. He didn't teach her strictly, and Reed's teaching method was not particularly extraordinary. Reed would open a book, show her a picture, and say what it was. In this way, he taught her words and letters as naturally as water flowing. It seems like she understands me perfectly even though I feel like I'm speaking horribly. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago, the girl had just tilted her head when Reed spoke. Even without the Master of Adaptation being manifested, she's like this? Reed checked Rosaria's status once again through the talent appraisal to see if he had missed anything. Name, Rosaria Adelheids Roten. Occupation, Tower Master's foster daughter. Age, 7 years old. Alignment, chaotic neutral. Health, 70/70ths. Stamina, 60/60ths. Mana, 40/40ths. Traits. None. Abilities. Assimilation LV1, Purity LV4. Unmanifested traits and abilities. Ruler of Magic, Master of Adaptation, Eternal Whole. Magic LV7, Magic Studies LV7, Mana Sensitivity LV7, Elemental Sensitivity LV7, Mental Strength LV6, and 5 more. None of them have manifested. It was only natural. Hoping that magic would suddenly manifest when she had never been involved in anything related to magic was no different than wishing for gold coins to fall from the sky. It's about time to start teaching magic. He had somehow succeeded in teaching language, but how should he approach teaching magic? He thought about it for a week, but couldn't find a proper answer. In order to focus on that issue, Reed purposely did not participate in the Tower Masters meeting. Participating in the Tower Masters meeting creates an optimal situation where I can't do anything properly. He already knew that he had set up expectations for the other Tower Masters beforehand the meeting. Disappointment comes in proportion to expectations. Reed knew that feeling and also knew that he should officially apologize at the Tower Masters meeting and respond like an adult. Well, thanks to avoiding it, I managed to teach her more lightheartedly. It wasn't very mature, but in the end, Rosaria successfully learned to read and write in just a week. And now it was time to move on to the next step. Rosaria. Rosaria, who was looking at a book, turned her head. Do you want to learn magic? At Reed's question, her red eyes began to sparkle. That's all for today, truckers. See you later.